celebrates the diversity series is offered to the increasingly complex and diverse Westchester University community in an effort to heighten our ability to understand and appreciate our differences and create an inclusive and respectful environment. Tonight's event has been co-sponsored by the Department of Communication Studies, the Office of Social Equity, the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences, and the Frederick Douglass Institute. Let's go ahead and give those awesome round of applause. Last November, my friend and my colleague, Dr. Gina Castle-Bell, came to my office one day and shared this idea of bringing a guest speaker on campus. She was very excited for how much this speaker would bring to you all as students and faculty and administrators here, and how much it would fit with our diversity series. And I think even in her short time here, Dr. Castle-Bell has done a great job of bringing energy, vibrancy, and care to the role of to the teacher-scholar model. She has sought to open the lockbox of ideas and challenge us all to think critically. So let's go ahead and give a warm round of applause to Dr. Gina Castle-Bell. She introduces tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Dr. Hill. And I just have to say that really this wouldn't have been possible without Dr. Hill tonight, and that together we worked really hard with the Communication Studies Department to put this event in motion. So thank you, Dr. Hill. So tonight's speaker is an associate professor of communication at George Mason University. He values holistic scholarship in research, teaching, and service. Courses taught include intercultural communication, organizational communication, persuasion and the rhetoric of social movements, and African American communication and identity. In addition to multiple academic journal articles, Dr. Hopson recently published Notes from the Talking Drum, Exploring Black Communication and Critical Memory in Intercultural Communication Contexts in 2011, and co-edited another book, Masculinity in the Black Imagination, Politics of Communicating Race and Manhood in 2012 with Ron Jackson. Currently, he's working on a manuscript about communication occurring within 48 hours after the 2008 presidential election of Barack Obama. Dr. Hopson promotes healthy communication strategies. In 2011, he received the George Mason University Spirit of Martin Luther King Award. Also, he served on George Mason University's Presidential Task Force to examine the relationship between the University Police Department and the university community. In 2006, Dr. Hopson served as the primary communications expert for an international research team working to reduce violent crime in Trinidad and Tobago. Since 2007, he has worked on the leadership committee for George Mason University's Campus Climate Task Force, an ongoing interdisciplinary effort to create safer environments for discourse and about and around controversial issues. And since 2008, he's also facilitated the Changing Lives Through Literature, a Fairfax County Public Library's reading program for men on parole and nonviolent youth offenders. And currently, he's facilitating this program in Fairfax County for the Juvenile Detention Center. The ongoing award-winning program has been nationally recognized for its excellence. Dr. Hopson has served as chair for the African American Communication and Culture Division at our National Communication Association, MCA. He has also served as secretary for the International and Intercultural Division of MCA. And he continues to present his research at various conferences and workshops. As co-founder of the HPC Leadership Institute, Dr. Hopson has facilitated violence prevention education seminars targeting more than 4,500 participants, and he actively promotes ways in which communication research may contribute to the health and well-being of society. So Dr. Hopson's biography and accomplishments are just one part of who he is as a scholar and as a person. So Mark Hopson is not only a scholar who I respect and admire, he is my academic mentor, my PhD advisor, and my good friend. His philosophy for teaching has inspired my own, and even with the pressures of publishing at a research institution, he still embodies the teacher-scholar model, and he really demonstrates critical pedagogy in action. which means he models what it means to educate the whole student inside of and outside of the classroom. And so indeed, students who leave his classes are better, more well-rounded individuals because they spent a semester or two learning with him. So not only do they learn critical material which will help them communicate with people throughout their lives, whether in the workplace, in small groups, interpersonally, in the health arena, or in everyday intercultural interactions, they also learn about work-life balance, having a passion for one's profession, and what it means to value individuals and truly to treat people with respect. So perhaps most fascinating to me is his ability to discuss difficult topics like critical intercultural communication in the 21st century, racism, discrimination, domestic violence, privilege, whiteness, and prejudice, with a passion for the subject that draws people in, but also with an ease and a professionalism that communicates the important message, but in a way that builds up people he speaks with and truly leaves them with food for thought and something that makes them better. So there's so much more that I could share, but it's truly an honor for me to welcome my professor, my mentor, and my friend, Dr. Mark Hopson, to the stage to discuss critical intercultural communication.
People around us. And so you can see by the people that I have around me that I must be all right. I must be in a situation. Hey, do me a favor. God bless. Somebody say, difference is all right. Difference is all right. One more time. Somebody say, difference is all right.
Difference is all right.
Okay, so that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about difference. We're going to talk about diversity. We're going to talk about Black History Month. We're going to talk about you all as future leaders moving into the 21st century with knowledge and information that will help you all to interact with one another in a safe and healthy way. I have to say thank you to Gina. I have to say thank you to Dr. Gina Castle-Bell. I have to say thank you to Dr. Tim Brown. I have to thank the Department of Communication Studies, the wonderful people, the wonderful scholars who create that department. I need to thank the College of Arts and Sciences. I need to thank the Office of Social Equity. I need to thank the Frederick Douglass Institute and you all, the fine community of Westchester University. And a special greetings to President Weisenstein and those administrators who make this institution work on a daily basis. As was mentioned earlier, my name is Mark Hopson. I'm from George Mason University. I'm an associate professor of communication. I specialize in critical intercultural communication. I specialize in traditions in African American rhetoric. And I'm also fairly astute in violence prevention communication. Gina mentioned some of the programs that I use, and I want to offer some examples from those programs as we move forward. I greet you this Black History Month. Because without this particular month, we might be led to believe that Black history is nothing more than pop culture. Indeed, it's more than that. It's more than retouched images of freedom fighters and catchy phrases. It's much more and crucial to the remembrance of those whose shoulders we stand on today. So I'm going to do three things. I'm going to greet you in remembrance of the past, in memory of our ancestors, of our forefathers and foremothers, those whom we may recall by name and those we may not. Those flag bearers, those torch carriers, the first punished and the first to perish. The fearless and the fearful. Those who sacrificed their lives for you and me. Those who booed us on from afar. You see, I believe that we live for more than just who we are today. I believe that those who came before us still find a way to push us on, to encourage us. And so I'm going to dedicate these few moments to my brother in the discipline. His name was Dr. Rex Crawley. Many of the people in this room know Dr. Rex Crawley. He was well known in the communication discipline. And he passed away suddenly and tragically to our astonishment recently. So Dr. Crawley would remind me to speak truth unapologetically. And so that's what I want to do. And in his passing, I'm reminded that greet you in celebration of the present, this very moment, called the present because that's what it is. It's a gift. It's a present to you and me, to utilize as we desire. We demonstrate that desire by our words and by our actions. So the question becomes today, what are you doing with your gift? What are you doing with your time? What did you do this morning? What did you do this afternoon? Indeed, what will you all do when you leave here tonight to contribute to the health and well-being of the people around you? Last, I greet you in preparation for the future, in the spirit of consciousness and awareness of future generations, those who benefit from today's efforts tomorrow and 10 years from now, or even 50 years from now. As surely as our bloodlines, our cells, our physiological attributes are passed down generationally, so too do our ideologies, our philosophies concerning life and living. Therefore, it's my goal tonight to say something to you all, anything tonight, to touch you all, to want to contribute to the health and well-being of people living tomorrow. You all are our future leaders. So, my goal tonight includes three things. First, I want to recognize Black History Month. I want to tell you a little bit about its value, its utility, and why it impacts all of us. I also want to identify this thing called critical intercultural communication, particularly in the 21st century. I want to tell you a little bit about how our communication matters for individuals and groups. And then I want to give you some strategies to use as you continue toward this thing called dialogue. Now, some would call my greeting Afrocentric or African-centered, and some might call it African-American rhetoric, I should say, or just plain Black in terms of its cultural aesthetic, which is fine because I am greeting you in this Black History Month. What we know to be Carter G. Woodson's vision to give a national recognition to the struggles and success, past, present, and future, of the descendants of Africa. So let me remind you that Woodson's vision wasn't minimizing to educating only Black people about Black people. He wanted to educate all people about Black contributions, much in the same way that Women's History Month should be of value to everyone, regardless of gender. In the same way that Hispanic Heritage Month should be recognized by all, or Jewish American Heritage Month should be recognized, or LGBTQ Month, or Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month should be recognized by all of us. These are times when extra emphasis is placed on the struggles of people who fall below the radar far too much in our time together. So we want to come together in this special time. So when asked why society needs these special months, I say to you because of racism, because of sexism, because of homophobia, and all the other isms that work to minimize a people's work and struggle. I agree with actor Morgan Freeman, who says that Black history is North American history, yet I know it's not always taught in that way. That's why students are more familiar with the likes of George Washington or Patrick Henry, but they're less in tune with the sacrifices of Ella Baker, who's the former director of branches for the NAACP, or Diane Nash, the civil rights leader known for her efforts to secure voting rights for the people of Alabama, or the distinguished professor and historian John Henry Clark, or A. Philip Randolph, organizer of the first Black labor union and one of the organizers on the March on Washington, or even Nelson Mandela, may he rest in peace, the first Black president of South Africa after serving 27 years in prison. So if you ask me whether knowledge about these individuals will make or break your academic progress, I would say to you that the lack of knowledge about cultural history leads to an increase in ignorance about culture. And I don't use the term ambiguously. I suggest to you that ignorance is a literal definition referring to a lack of knowledge and uninformed actions. So tonight I bring you information about Black History Month because ignorance of my culture, U.S. culture, is to be insensitive to my struggle. And insensitive or apathetic attitudes lead to irresponsible actions toward my culture. I'm hopeful that tonight will increase responsibility for how difference matters. So earlier today I had a chance to talk a little bit about critical intercultural communication It's the way we live, think, and perform identity. In essence, we're all bodies of culture, moving through societal spaces. And sometimes these bodies move fluidly. At other times, they crash horribly. So critical implies the study of power in this dance called intercultural communication, or the power that occurs through this crash. Indeed, it's a study of how our stories concern communication as cultural bodies on a daily basis. Now, my earliest memories of critical intercultural communication include the time I was somewhat stereotyped as a deficient student because I used language that had been stereotyped as deficient. So, for example, as a youngster, I might enter into a classroom and say, "Man, it'd be cold in here," right? And what does the teacher say when you use the word "be" in such a way? Deficient, grammatically incorrect, right? Or am I wrong? Okay, so I walk into this room as a professor and I say, "It'd be cold in here." How many of you are going to get up and walk out? This guy has nothing to tell me. But I learned through my studies that the way in which "be" is used within the African American community makes it multidimensional, meaning it refers to 3 dimensions of time: past, present, and future. It was cold yesterday, it's cold today, and undoubtedly it'll be cold tomorrow. So is that deficient or is it genius? Critical intercultural communication examines power in the ways in which we frame not only communication with individuals and groups, the way we empower them or the way we disempower them based on those stereotypes. Critical intercultural communication looks at who uses what communication and for what reasons. So think about this. Carter G. Woodson used critical intercultural communication in 1926 when he came up with this idea called Negro History Week. Think about it. The name alone flies in the face of segregation and oppression, especially when you think about 1926. It's what Bell Hooks would call voice, or what Bromsky would call the gaze, right? Woodson's goal is to frame space and time to popularize Black achievements, when the aftermath of the African diaspora, or slavery, would strategically seek to eliminate those stories. So Woodson understands that an annual event would help us to shake off these mental chains. We have to shake off the mental chains. Shaking off the mental chains for the sake of you and me. Black History Month is a reminder to do that. But there's so much more work to be done. Something else about Black History Month is after it was National Negro History Week, the students at Kent State University in 1970 would call it Black History Month, which is also interesting terminology. So you notice that there's a symbolic stretching of time and space from a week to a month, right? It's very rhetorical. Also, the word Black separates people around the globe. So regardless of one's lived experience, they have a connection via this diaspora. Now, Black is a race, socially constructed, we would say, but it's also culture. It's even nationality, right? You've heard about this idea called Black America. As such, I would suggest to you that it is a proper noun. Unless you mean to imply that I am literally Black, as this microphone, or unless you want to imply that somebody is literally white. If we're talking about cultural groups, then we might want to suggest that cultural groups are indeed proper nouns and worthy of study in that way. There's this idea of Black English or African American vernacular. There's Black food or soul food. There's even Black music, whether it's R&B, hip hop, jazz, rock, or gospel. When I think about the Black experience, I think about my own church experience. Growing up in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the second largest city in Michigan, behind Detroit, it would not be uncommon for me to be in church and to have one of the elders sitting to my right, who at times would be struck by the Holy Ghost. Anybody ever heard of the Holy Ghost? The Holy Ghost comes from on high. It's that feeling that God has touched you. And that elder might throw her hands up and she might scream. She might run down that aisle and run back. She might fall out on the floor. and it would be no cause for alarm, because we understood this was a unique cultural experience. At best, we might cover her up, make sure that her dress was laid just right, and allow her to experience the spirituality in the way that she chooses to do so. So certainly there's much to learn about the Black experience and much to appreciate about this month. Just in terms of the Black experience, it's also interesting to know how identity continues to change for people identifying as Black. Right? So we came here as African, but we had our names taken away or stripped away and made into slaves. Think about these two terms, to avow and to ascribe. To avow means to claim, to ascribe is to have an identity placed upon you. So to have your name taken and have an identity placed upon you is to have an identity ascribed. Think about the power of language. Think about the power of language in that way. We moved from being colored to Negro to Black to Afro-American. I never understood that, right? Who's identified by hairstyle, right? To African-American, to persons of color, to Black or African heritage, right? When I think about the political ramifications of naming, I think about myself. I oftentimes call myself an African American, but I realize that I do that in a political sense, because other times I'm just Black, point blank, and I'm proud of it. It's also interesting to note that there are groups within the Black experience that would even identify themselves as the N-word, be it ER or GA. Apparently there's a difference in meaning there, right? And it always strikes me as interesting is that when I see that word spelled, it is with a capital letter, which boggles my mind. So I said this to the class earlier. Think about the power of language and how what you are how what you are called impacts who you are and what you do. So I asked the group this earlier. I said, at what point in time were the slaves freed? And the group told me what year.
1863.
I said, we need some history classes in here. Who freed the slaves? Abraham Lincoln. How did he do it? He signed the Emancipation Proclamation, and his signature, poof, did. Right? So there's Abraham Lincoln and there's Jesus Christ, the two most powerful people to ever walk the earth. Language works in such a way that it either allows you to avow an understanding of self or it allows you to ascribe an understanding of self. I suggest to you that Abraham Lincoln did not free anybody with his signature, but what Abraham Lincoln did do was to say, stop harming them, stop killing them, stop torturing them, stop terrorizing them. So his signing the Emancipation Proclamation is symbolic, but we give that meaning, we give that power in the same way that what you claim to be versus what other people call you is a conflict in power and an example of critical intercultural communication. So I want to examine critical intercultural communication in the world today, but I need for you to all have open minds. So I need for you to be on your most honest and at your best position, all right? I'm going to show you an image, and I want you to tell me what you saw in the first 5 seconds. All right? Somebody, I want you to tell me what you saw in the first 5 seconds. Was that 5 seconds? You said no, it wasn't 5? All right, here's 2 more. What did you see? You saw lavender, you saw colors. You saw lavender.
Words describe the wrong color.
You saw words describing the wrong color. Now I need for you all to be honest. Who would raise with this young man? You saw words describing the wrong color. Put your hands up high. Okay, a few people. Now let's see how honest this group is. Put your hands up if you didn't see the same thing. We have one. Oh, we have a few people who didn't see it and they admit it. So the idea I want to explore is perception. One person saw something that someone else didn't. Does that make the person smarter, more intelligent? He perceived something that he saw to be true or real. And in this case, he's right. But the fact that he points it out enlightens and informs us, correct? So we're better off from you sharing that information. We don't use that information to evaluate or to minimize one's importance or worth. We simply say, I learned something from one of my peers, or I learned something from one of my colleagues. Perception, the way we see life. All right? Let's try it one more time. 5 seconds, counting? All right. I think that's a little long. All right, so what do you see? One of those things that you can see one way, but it's really the other way. Anybody else? What'd you see?
I thought it was a woman with like some sort of headdress with like
Woman with a headdress. Maybe a feather?
yeah.
All right. Anybody else see a woman with a headdress that might have been a feather? A couple of us? Any unique characteristics or qualities about her? She was older. Same when you agree she was older? One more time. She was looking in a different direction. Older as well? Younger. You say older, you say younger. Who's smarter? Who's more intelligent? And I know some of you have seen this before, so I appreciate your honesty and not saying anything. But what I want to do is point out the fact that we have different realities at work. We have different truths, different perceptions, right? And how many didn't see a woman at all? How many of us saw an older woman? How many of us saw a younger woman? All right. How many of us see an older woman? Put your hands up. How many of us see a younger woman? Is there anyone here who sees both? Would you be willing to come up and show us where you see them? All right. I didn't mention that this was an interactive discussion.
This is the older woman, and then this is the younger.
See now? So there's someone who still doesn't see it, obviously, from your face.
There's her mouth, the older woman, and her nose, and her eyes. And then this is the eye of the younger woman, and her chin.
Now, you still don't see it. I love it. Honestly. You see older and younger. You see older, but you don't see the younger. Anybody else want to come up and help us out here? Yes? You going to show us the younger? All right. And what's your name? Trisha is helping us, and what's your name? Danielle. Danielle is helping. So this would be your eyelash. This would be your cheekbone and your jawbone. Ears, hair. So you see it now. And how do you see it? Why do you see it? Because Danielle and Trisha showed you. It doesn't mean they're smarter. Doesn't mean they're more intelligent. It simply means that you saw something that someone else didn't see. Or that someone else saw something that you didn't see. And it happens that way. Life is about learning from other people. Perceptions occur based on people's experiences. If you don't believe me, check this out. You said you saw a young woman, you saw an older woman, right? So what's the definition of old? At what age does one become old? You better not say it. I'm teasing. At what age does one become old? 60? Okay. Who here thought that 18 was old at one point in their lives? interesting that your perception changes the closer you get to the number? Same number, when it was somebody else it was old, or when it was somebody else it was young, but when it's you it's something different. So I want to call to your attention that perception works in that way. So when we talk about sensitive issues, keep in mind it's not about objective, solid, palpable truth at all times. Sometimes it's an ambiguous truth. Sometimes it's truth with a lowercase t, meaning that it might be truth for me, but may not necessarily be true for you. But if you're willing to open your ears and to listen to my side of the story, you may learn from my truth. All right? So, the value of critical intercultural communication is the capacity to learn from other cultural perceptions of the world. All right? So, you're all ready to think with an open mind, correct? Okay. So, let's look at language, this idea of avowing and ascribing. Remember, avow is to do what? Claim identity. To ascribe is to give identity. What do you think the purpose of Black History Month is? To claim identity or to give identity? Do you want me to give you an identity or do you want to claim your own? I, as a male, I'm not saying that all males do this, but I might see women in one way. You may not agree. I might see women as little missies, ladylike, whatever, sweetheart, baby, and you might not want to be known by any of those names. So would you rather have an identity ascribed to you, or do you want to avow your own? You want to probably avow your own, correct? Black History Month, like so many heritage months, is an effort to avow identity, an effort to create and claim one's own identity to break or disrupt stereotypes that have been used against them. So when we talk about identity, how do we define these terms? Trayvon Martin, Justin Bieber, Michael Sherman, Floyd Davis. In 2012, after Trayvon Martin's death, a Florida safety officer was suspended for allegedly posting on Facebook, and I quote, "Another thug gone, bye-bye thug, R.I.P." End quote. What do these words represent coming from an officer of the law? Is that avowing identity or ascribing identity? Is it claiming or giving? Giving identity. It's hard to believe that this young man has been gone for 2 years now. This month, interesting to note that Trayvon Martin was born in February and he died in February. That term thug is an interesting idea because if you do the research, even if you just do a quick Google search on each and every image, that word comes up for each other, right? Justin Bieber has been called a thug. He's been accused of wanting to be a thug. Is it possible? Can he avow that identity? Or is ascribing identity such a powerful process that regardless of what he claims to be, we might not ever see him in that way? It's interesting that Richard Sherman of the Seattle Seahawks called the media's use of this term thug another way of saying the N-word. Right? You agree with that? Could that be another way, another slur, in the same way that the N-word works? If the N-word can be avowed or ascribed, is this truly the meaning of the word thug? How does power work here when you think about critical intercultural communication? What happens when you have different cultural groups and different cultural members referring to each other in this way? Well, some would say the results can be tragic. a Stanford grad received an apology from Fox News after being called out on the use of that term. So maybe there's learning yet to be done. You all have heard about the Jordan Davis death, Michael Dunn trial. Trial occurred, was completed over this past weekend. Jordan Davis was killed, they say, as a result of loud music at a gas station. The shooter was convicted of second-degree murder over the weekend. He argued there was a weapon in the car, but there was never a weapon found. No doubt that difference in diversity can be life or death for some people. So my question is, how did we get to this point? And how can intercultural communication help us to become better and more responsible communicators? I would suggest to you that we have to examine our perceptions of one another, because our perceptions inform our communication. Looking at these photographs, I would also ask, at what point does one cease to be a subject and become an object? Right? Subjects are human beings, people who we respect to, people that we feel are deserving. Objects are those who are dehumanized and minimized. So you might think these are extreme examples. And again, my point is to recognize the meaning of Black History Month in this particular context, and then to overlap that with this idea of critical intercultural communication. So we move beyond the extreme examples, and we talk about another extreme example. MLK Black Card. These are students at an institution I won't say out west in Arizona, where students wore jerseys, drank out of watermelon cups, and used Instagram pics with hashtags that said things like Blackout for MLK and Hood. And so my question to you is, are they bad students or are they uninformed? Remember that word, ignorance? I wasn't trying to use it to slander anybody. I simply say that without knowledge, we acted properly. Right? So if you don't have knowledge of MLK and what he represents and his movement, then maybe you see it as some flip historic occurrence that really didn't make a difference. I would suggest to you that studies in critical intercultural communication, recognizing things like Black History Month, might have been the difference between responsible and irresponsible actions. Because sometimes we make mistakes because we don't have the information. Reminds me of a time my daughter came home, she must have been about third grade. She comes home and she says, "Daddy, you told me slavery was bad." And I said, "Yeah, baby, it was pretty bad. Right? People died behind it." She said, "My teacher said it wasn't so bad." I said, "Really? Well, what did your teacher say?" And she said, "Some people were happy." And I thought to myself, I guess it's where you stand, right? I guess it's your perception. So I gave her a little more information, trying to erase, remove, omit that ignorance, and give her information. And then I thought, well, the teacher has a class of 20, 25 students, and the students see that teacher as a wealth of knowledge. They see that teacher as the leader in this particular situation, and that if the teacher says it, it must be so. So I thought I'd better go talk to the teacher as well. Brought the same information to the teacher. I also brought photographs of lynching, U.S. terrorism, and I think that changed her mind. So we agreed that even though we stand on different sides on the issues, that to portray it as a happy time or something that wasn't significant enough to be examined thoroughly was probably a mistake on her part. With the information, she will present the information. With the information, she will present the topic differently, no doubt. So it takes that information at times. It took those photographs, it took those stories to make a point with that particular teacher. like to share with you all another lesson, graphic truth regarding the Black experience. The Tuskegee Institute recorded more than 3,400 lynchings between 1882 and 1951. That occurred after the Emancipation Proclamation. That occurred after slavery. So if we're knowledgeable students, at least with a general understanding of history, we understand that 1865 didn't turn things around and make things fair and equal across the board, right? It was a Reconstruction period, and exactly that. Reconstruction was the plan to sew things back together, to knit things back together, to put things together in a way that would allow for us to move forward. Throughout that time, Ida B. Wells Barnett, who was a suffragist, a sociologist, a civil rights leader, and a publisher, argued that lynching was a violent act. And again, violence is very rhetorical, meant to control or punish blacks who competed with whites. Violence is always about control. So lynchings are an attempt to control people, right? Not only is it physically abusive, but you can use a lynching to make a symbolic statement, right? To keep people in fear. That's what makes it rhetorical. Also know that lynching is any race-based murder, and it doesn't have to be through hanging or a rope. It's any type of murder based on race. All right? Now, Ida B. Wells fought against lynching by publicizing it to the world, which is critical intercultural communication. She inspired the NAACP's Mary B. Talbert, who galvanized the support of white women to work with her against lynching. So critical intercultural communication draws in people from different sides. There is no way that slavery would have been abolished, that lynching would have come to some type of, we would have become aware of lynching without the input and the actions of non-blacks. In the same way, we can't address issues having to do with race or culture or gender or sexual orientation or ability/disability or class or religion without the input of those who may not self-identify in those ways. But you have to take an interest and you have to become knowledgeable about those experiences. Now, even though these women fought against lynching, far too many people died from this particular act. I suggest to you that history informs communication today. On your left is a photo, 1911 lynching of Lord Nelson, who was taken into custody after she was accused of shooting an Oklahoma sheriff in the leg. As the story goes, the sheriff's posse came to her home to investigate the theft of a cop. A shot went off. To save her teenage son, Laura said she fired the fatal shot. But consequently, she and her son were arrested and placed in a jail cell that was raided later that night. Now, not shown here is a photograph of 35 men, 6 women, and 17 children who were spectators at that lynching. Even though all those people were in the picture, and all you have to do is Google Lord Nelson, you can pull up more photographs and pull up the story. Even though all those people were in the picture, no one was ever charged for the murder. It's interesting to note that one of the spectators in the photograph is a man by the name of Charlie Guthrie. Charlie Guthrie is the father of Woody Guthrie. Some of you may know the name. Woody Guthrie is an American folk hero. He's an American musician who talked about the plights of early America. In his own music, Woody would talk about this particular situation. He was moved to voice opposition to lynching. All right? The other photo represents hairbrushes belonging to victims of the Jewish Holocaust. These were found soon after the liberation of Auschwitz in 1945. Both pictures are highly rhetorical. Millions upon millions of people endured great struggle and violent death we have a Black History Month. This is why we have a Jewish Heritage Month, or GLBTQ Month, or Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. So because you're not impacted by it directly doesn't make it unimportant. Both poles represent humanity, and they force us to consider our awareness about human struggles. After which I hope after viewing we're more inclined to behave responsibly. I suggest to you that those students at that Arizona institution might behave differently if they had this information, if they had this knowledge, some of which comes through the value of the Heritage Month. Recall the words of Bow and Scribe. This flyer represents a recent so-called Black History Month event. It was sponsored by an African-American organization in Flint, Michigan. The event was canceled, but the flyer made national news. A student group put this together. You can see it's MLK, gold chain, fingers are doing the west side. Mid-Michigan Teen Parties presents Freedom to Twerk. Anybody know anything about twerking at Westchester? You all twerk out here? George Mason University is near D.C. Little twerking goes on out there. I don't doubt that some twerking goes on here, to be honest. Black students, African American students, put this together. Does it make it any more responsible than the other images we've seen? Do they have the right to avow identity for themselves in this way? I mean, after all, they are African American. Don't they have the right to use this image? Do you think they would behave differently if they had the information? The thing about ignorance, and again, it is a lack of knowledge. The thing about ignorance is that it doesn't hurt until something goes wrong. But if you are in a privileged situation where ignorance doesn't bother you, you may never know. I may never know how much I benefit from male privilege until it steps on my toes. I may not have to think about whether or not I need to watch out for myself when I'm walking 3 blocks down the road after this event. Whether or not I'm going to hold my keys in my hand in such a way that if I have to fend for myself, I can. Whether or not I'm going to step into lit areas or walk with my girls or keep a cell phone to my ear. I may not understand what it means to have gender oppression in that way until it steps on my toes. But I can tell you what, I'd rather be a participant in eliminating discrimination, gender bias, and even gender privilege before it happens in that way. So again, what's the purpose of Black History Month? Did we say to shake off those mental chains? Did he have to be shake off the mental chains? All right. In 1903, W.E.B. Du Bois argued that the 20th century would be plagued by the problem of the color line. And many of us might agree that it was. Later, Andrew Hacker, Cornel West, and others suggested the color line would shift, making it more ambiguous and more dangerous in the 21st century. Indeed, our national identity is moving away from simple notions of color, but social power remains intact. As such, we'll continue to see non-dominant groups attempt to align with and gain exceptions by dominant groups based on race, gender, wealth, religion, language, sexual identity, physical ability, and so on. In other words, the disempowered and marginalized have to be careful or be forced to negotiate, manage, and even buy into dominant practices with the hope of gaining success in those dominant structures. This becomes oppression when dominant ideologies minimize or totally deny humanity for marginalized groups. Question for you. How many of us feel a daily pressure to change our speech or our ethnic appearance in order to fit in? How many of us want to hide something about our religion or sexual identity in order to fit in? How many of us hide some significant part of our lives in order to get by on a daily basis? In class, at work, or elsewhere. You understand that to resist this pressure takes everything you have. But the rest of us need to understand that to support those individuals will take everything we have. We want to support individuals and groups who don't appreciate and enjoy the freedoms and privileges that we have. So it means taking stock of how communication works to privilege or oppress people. I don't claim to have all the answers, but I can share thoughts garnered from some thoughtful scholars. So we talked a little bit about Black History Month. We talked a little bit about critical intercultural communication, this idea of values, beliefs, practices, and norms becoming embodied and somehow or another interacting, either as a nice salsa dance or as a crash. So now I want to move towards strategies for how you can become more responsible in your communication. I want to focus on 21st century communication because you all are the leaders of the 21st century. And I want to begin with what's called Marty's anti-racist dialogue strategy. Marty offers a guide for addressing the complexities of critical intercultural communication and gives us these steps as a basis almost for healthy dialogue. So number one, to employ self-reflection to recognize the benefit and detriment of power and privilege. All right? MLK once said that nothing in the world is more dangerous than sincere ignorance. Wanting to do what's right but not having the information. So continually making the same mistakes over and over again. I take this to mean that good intentions are not enough. Just because you hope for something to change doesn't mean it will happen. You have to actively work to make that happen. So we employ self-reflection. That means we look at each other. We look at ourselves. We ask ourselves, what am I doing? What am I doing on a daily basis? How do I contribute to either liberation for different individuals and groups, or how do I contribute to oppression? When I leave this room tonight, I'm going to ask myself, what did I say that made a difference? What can I use again? What should I change? What did they accept? What did they reject? Self-reflection is good for that. You take stock of how you contribute to communication. Now, don't wallow in it. Don't say, I made this mistake, therefore I'm not a good person. Reflect, learn from the lesson, and move on. Number two, re-envision the surrounding world from other perspectives and recognize other cultures as lending to the world. This goes back to the idea of perception. We have to re-envision the world. Think about it this way. I was talking to one of my colleagues recently, and she said to me, you know what? In Japan, we oftentimes consider ourselves the West, and we see you all as the East. And I said, wait a minute. Can't be. I was taught differently. And then I realized, well, if I'm in Japan, maybe I'm seeing things differently. Or maybe she's seeing things differently. In other words, I have to re-envision the world from her perspective, from her position. And because I believe it to be so, doesn't necessarily make it true with a capital T. What does it mean to be American? Where do Americans live? Here in the United States? Yes. So what do we say about those in Central and South America? They're not real Americans, right? I believe some would argue. Someone said, you don't have a monopoly on the American identity. Perhaps you're U.S. American, perhaps you're North American, requires that we re-envision the surrounding world. We have to look at it differently. And you do that by gaining information. And there are opportunities to do so all around you. Black History Month is one of those opportunities. So you have to ask yourself, how does perspective inform my view of the world? Again, once you become a more conscious, critical thinker and communicator, you realize that everything changes. Number 3, be willing to contribute to intercultural and interracial interactions. Remember that Mary B. Talbert called upon the support of white women to spread the word about lynching. She didn't make it a black thing. And whites didn't say, well, that's a black problem. There were folks who acted as allies and got involved. It takes effort, it takes energy from everybody. Right? Sometimes students want to stop at the idea of being sensitive to an issue, right? Because sometimes knowledge is willing to be the point where we're sensitive that something is happening. I'm sensitive that there is this idea of homophobia and that people suffer behind that. But what good am I if I don't contribute to eliminating that? Being aware of it is one thing, great. You move to an awareness. But what happens after you become aware, after you become sensitive? The idea is to become responsible. And to be responsible means to take ownership for how difference matters. All right? The new century requires that we invest more of ourselves in our intercultural contribution. Number 4, care about intercultural relationships, plain and simple. This means to care even when we're not forced to do so. It's always interesting to me when I go out and speak to young people about relationship abuse or violence prevention. First thing young men want to ask me, why are you doing this? Were you arrested for some type of assault? Did you beat your wife? For some, it's hard to believe that I just might be interested in helping to eradicate violence. There's no punishment behind it. Care about intercultural and interracial relationships. Understand, too, that oppression impacts everybody. Even if you don't know it does, right? Again, ignorance is bliss. Number 5, reject privilege. You all know what privilege is, right? Privilege is unearned advantage based on social identity, your gender, sexual orientation privilege, race privilege, ability privilege. We all operate under some form of privilege. How much time do I have? 6 minutes? 15 minutes? Okay. So, some of you are familiar with Peggy McIntosh's work. Peggy McIntosh is a scholar who whose work really impacted the late 70s and 80s regarding racial and gender privilege, right? And so Peggy McIntosh would identify as European American or white. And what she suggested was that there's an invisible knapsack that European Americans enjoy that her black co-workers could not enjoy. And so she said, to show you how this thing works, I'm going to give you tools for my knapsack. And I'm not asking anybody to raise a hand or to stand up, but I am asking that you answer within your own mind whether or not you can say yes to her tools of invisible advantage. So Peggy McIntosh would say, when I'm told about our national heritage or about civilization, I am shown that people of my color made it what it is. When I am shown or told about national heritage or about civilization, I am shown or taught that people of my color made it what it is. Peggy McIntosh would also say, I don't have to educate my children to become aware of systemic racism for their own daily physical protection. I don't have to educate my children to be aware Peggy McIntosh would also say that I can remain oblivious to other cultural experiences without feeling any penalty for such oblivion. I can remain oblivious to other cultural experiences without feeling any penalty for such oblivion. I always thought that was interesting. So then I thought about, okay, she can rattle off these privileges that not everyone can enjoy. I wonder if I can do the same. You know, as a black man, I wonder if I can say the same thing. And so I looked at it in a few different ways. How about this one? I am comfortable sharing my sexual orientation at school and at work. I am comfortable sharing my sexual orientation at school and or at work. How about this? I am comfortable discussing my partner in school or at work. I think that's a privilege that everybody enjoys. I see a couple of heads, so I had a couple people with me. All I need is a couple. How about this? I can hold hands or show PDA or the display of affection without feeling stares or comments or otherwise potential harm. I can hold hands or show PDA without feeling stares or comments or otherwise potential harm. What do you think that privilege is based on? One person? Sexuality. What about this one? I can access most public places, including restrooms, restaurants, and apartment complexes. I can access most public places, including restrooms, restaurants, and apartment complexes. For this, I am not dependent on any kind of hearing, visual, or mobile aid. I'm not dependent on any kind of hearing, visual, or mobile aid. Or I don't need to fear stares or double takes or pity from strangers. What is that privilege based on? Disability, ability/disability. How about this? I know how to survive without a checking account or bank card. I know how to survive without a checking account or bank card. Or I know how to get by without electricity or running water. I know how to get by without electricity or running water. What do you think? Based on one, based on class. I could very well use Movie Payne's research to say something to the effect that I know how to set a table during different holidays. Or my family owns 2 homes which are staffed. Those are also realities based on class. And you know, sometimes I'll say this in class, and I've had students from outside the DC area who say, yeah, 2 homes, staff, not a big deal. It is a reality. It is an experience. It is a privilege or denied privilege. So what I want you to understand is that different lived experiences take on different meanings for individuals and groups. And because you may not be aware of or have knowledge of those experiences doesn't make them any less real or less significant than your own. So Marty would suggest that we reject that privilege by learning, by gaining the information about those experiences so that we communicate more responsibly. All right, I'm just about done here. And last but not least, this idea of moving from sensitivity to responsible action. See, what you're doing now is you're thinking about some of these ideas. You may not agree with all of them, but hopefully you're thinking about something. And hopefully everybody has become a little more sensitive to the ways in which difference matters. But it doesn't question then becomes, what are you going to do? What action will you take to make a difference? Those of us in the communication field, in the communication discipline, say that regardless of what we do, communication should lend to the health and well-being of the world around us. It ought to make a positive difference. So what will your actions be to make that positive difference? All right, you have to take action. You can't stop at being sensitive. Please don't leave college knowing about things and not necessarily doing anything. All right, so concluding thoughts, I was part of a wonderful, wonderful project recently with Dr. Castle Bell and Dr. Richard Craig at George Mason University. And we looked at this idea of the metaphor of talk. You know, some of you have had that talk, right? You had a talk with a parent, or maybe some of our parents have had talks with our own kids. Talk might be about, I don't know, how to stay safe from sexual encounter, how to use a banking account, how to do any of those things that a young adult would require. But the talk, in my experience, also had to do with how to negotiate race and gender as a young man. And so Dr. Castle Bell and Dr. Craig looked at this idea of the talk surrounding the trial of George Zimmerman and the death of Trayvon Martin. And we wanted to understand how people talk or talked about that issue from many different perspectives. A lot of interesting stuff came out of that. We realized that people take different sides on controversial issues, but the strategies that we came out with include the four before you now. That to talk in terms of intercultural communication, to talk in terms of critical intercultural communication, to talk you all will need to engage as you move forward into the 21st century, will require you all to listen. And I know we think you know how to listen. But listening requires listening to yourself as well. Listening to your own shortcomings, listening to your own stereotypes, becoming aware of those stereotypes and being able to set those stereotypes aside. And then thinking critically about sensitive issues. All right? We also realize that it's important that we speak about these issues honestly. We have to be truthful in sharing our own experiences, and we also have to be truthful in our own limitations. What is it that I don't understand? What is it that I don't get? All right? 3, as difficult as it might be, try not to make assumptions about other people. At all costs, do your best to give others the benefit of the doubt. Understand that if you are correct about that person 99.9% of the times in your assumptions, the one thing they say that you weren't expecting could make all the difference in how you understand the situation. So avoid making assumptions about sensitive issues. And last but not least, always do your best work in trying to contribute to the societal health and well-being of our world. This idea of work is real. It takes work every day. You find yourself in situations where you can either be ethnocentric, you can either be insensitive, or you can be ignorant to the way in which difference matters. Otherwise, you can work hard at understanding how difference matters, and you can work to contribute to the health and well-being of not only yourself, but those around you. So I should add as well to have faith. Have faith that things will get better. As you work, have faith that things will work out, and that, as MLK would say, this universe is on the side of justice. That's why I want to conclude with this idea of everything must change, because I think that some of the artists that speak to the idea of everything must change are phenomenal thinkers, and I don't doubt that you all are phenomenal people. So as you move forward, know that everything must change, and that you have to be a part of making sure it does so in a healthy way. All right? And with that, wake up some of the people around you and let
Dr. Brad, we're trying to incorporate certain phrases into humor. But are there any questions that you'd like to ask?
Now, at the moment, just want to get out of here.
I see a hand.
In another class, I'm working on a research paper, and the topic that I'm working on is removing the label and ruling the individual. So basically around the center of special education, leaving children in special
Okay.
education or gifted. So I'm currently looking for references. So do any of your books, because I know you kind of talk about labeling and stuff like that. Do any of
Sure.
your works
Sure.
discuss that topic?
See me when you leave, and also, I haven't given out all my cards. I would suggest to you that, are you a communication major?
Yes.
Okay, so you have rhetoricians in the house. You have people who look at language and the meaning behind language. Dr. Brown would be one. There's somebody else in here.
Dr. Hill.
Where is it? There you go. Leon Hill. Those are people who will give you a step-by-step analysis of how language works to either empower or disempower individuals and groups. What you want to do is get an understanding of how rhetoric works first and foremost, because rhetoric is language, right? Get that understanding, and I will guarantee you that it will open up room for thought around that idea. You know, we talked a little bit about labeling as violence prevention. I told you guys earlier that there are different ways that you can abuse a significant other. One of the ways that you can abuse or cause violence is through words, right? Words, language, labels. So to call somebody out their name repeatedly does something to dehumanize that particular person. And we see it every day. Some of us are used to it though. So we don't stop and question the way in which language works to disempower us, or the ways in which language works to move us from a subject to an object. Right? And I won't get into